Hello, everybody, and welcome to Everybody is Terminal, a podcast with me, John David, as your host. Just a disclaimer on this episode, we're going to talk a bit about drug use, so mom and dad, don't listen to this one. um, Honestly, though, on this episode, we're going to talk about a bit of the fallout post diagnoses and cancer post diagnoses. So we'll fast forward about 6 months after my last or my treatment and after my original diagnosis. I have always been a huge fan of international travel, and among those places that hold my heart the dearest is Denmark, specifically Copenhagen. It's the birthplace of a lot of my relatives. A lot of my family has immigrated from there, and it's this beautiful utopian society. It is, I cannot even describe how fantastic it is as a place. Um, so, after cancer, I decided that obviously I'd love to travel again. So I started trying to make plans, started to look at flights to see what I could afford in the future, preferably in June or July when the weather heated up. As I was looking through flights, I found a flight round trip to Denmark from Vancouver, which cost only $600 round trip, which is an absolute smoking deal on a flight to the Nordic countries. Probably because it was in the middle of winter, and nobody tends to travel, especially to Northern Europe, Eastern Europe during the middle of winter. But the flights were too cheap to pass up, and I had nothing else happening, so I might as well travel. I decided to book the flight, and within 2 weeks of booking that flight, I was on a flight to Denmark. To catch this flight, I had to transverse down into the US to Seattle, which was the cheapest flight, and then across to Denmark. My aunt and uncle actually were able to pick me up in the airport. It was pretty funny because they'd gotten reports from other family members that I was this not naive, but this religious young lad coming over to travel. And when I arrived in Denmark, I was in the airport, and you've just been on a 12-hour flight, you've had layovers, you've eaten shite plain food. So I decided to grab a hot dog, biggest thing in Denmark. And so I grabbed that, and I also grabbed a pack of cigars and a 6-pack of beers because you are allowed to drink anywhere in Denmark. It's not unreasonable to just grab some beer and just go out on the street and enjoy beverages with people, as it should be. So my aunt and uncle were kind of shocked when I walked out of the airport with a 6-pack in one hand and a cigar in hand, ready to start my vacation in Denmark. We traveled a lot. They brought me to a lot of places. The first 5 or 6 days, we just explored different castles, and the weather was absolutely frigid. It being in late January, possibly February, but the weather was pretty frigid. It was a pretty cold winter that they were having. I could definitely feel that my body was getting run down, especially due to being that fresh out of chemotherapy. And still, you still recover. It takes years to recover, and I did not really realize that yet at this point. So eventually we went to Kronenborg, which is a castle. It's a stronghold in the town of Helsingør, Denmark, immortalized as Elsinore in William Shakespeare's play Hamlet. Kronenborg is one of the most important Renaissance castles in Northern Europe and has been added to UNESCO World Heritage lists. The castle is situated on the extreme northeastern tip of the island of Zealand at the narrowest point of the Øresund, the sound between present Denmark and the provinces of present Sweden that were also Danish at the time the castle was built. In this part, the sound is only 4 kilometers wide, hence the strategic importance of maintaining a coastal fortification at this location, commanding one of the few outlets of the Baltic Sea. The castle's story dates back to a stronghold, Krogen, built by King Eric V in 1420s, along with the fortress Karnan, Helsingborg, on the opposite coast of Øresund. It controlled the entranceway to the Baltic Sea. From 1574 to 1585, King Frederick II had the medieval fortress radically transformed into a magnificent Renaissance castle. The main architects were the Flemings Hans Frederick van Paschen and Anthony van Alberging, whereas the sculptural work was coordinated by Gert van Gergen. In 1629, a fire destroyed much of the castle, but King Christian V subsequently had it rebuilt. The castle also had a church within its walls. In 1658, Kronenborg was besieged and captured by the Swedes, who took many of its valuable art treasures as war plunder. In 1785, the castle ceased to be a royal residence and was converted into barracks for the army. The army left the castle in 1923, and after a thorough renovation, it was restored for the public and reopened. So this castle, they really restored it into a palace again. It had these gorgeous tapestries and these amazing wood floors. Being a total wood floor nerd, it just blew my mind that they had these wooden floors with these beautiful inlays of flowers, and just way ahead of its time for where it was. There's also this beautiful statue in the vaults there, which is of Holger Dansk, who, according to a legend, was linked to Arthurian myth, a Danish king known as Ogier the Dane. Holger Dansk was taken to Avalon by Morgan the Frey. He returned to rescue France from danger, then traveled to Kronenborg Castle, where he sleeps until he is needed to save his homeland. His beard has grown to extend along to the ground. A statue of the sleeping Holger Dansk has been placed in the castle. Very cool place. He's there to guard against the Swedes for when they eventually attack again, which is not very likely now, but considering the back and forth, it was very likely for many hundreds of years. So I'm in this beautiful castle. I've went around, I've seen so much of it. There's just multiple floors, and there's so many jewels and artifacts, just 100-year-old gorgeous artifacts inside of this palace. And about 3 hours into this, just the several days of compounded touring one place after another started to really wear down on me. I don't know how to describe the feeling post chemo to people who've never had it, but you get smells and just auras almost of your sickness or being in that hospital bed, and things can just set you off. And I was getting set off, I was so tired and I felt so ill. I ended up sitting down. There was a display in front of me of all these beautiful old tapestries, and there's a bench in front of them so you could sit there and just enjoy these tapestries. And, in this hundreds and hundreds of year old palace, and I just sat there head in hands, and I started to get violently ill. So I'm in this palace and I'm just throwing up all over these beautiful floors, and people are milling about around me. It was super awkward. That's really the first time that I really, as naive as it sounds, really understood how much my life had changed because of cancer, and how this was something that was going to affect me for many years to come. And it wasn't just a one off, you did chemo and now you're healthy. It has serious ramifications. I mean, they try to poison your body, and that's exactly what it is. You're just getting concentrated doses of poison that are going to heal you. It was super humbling getting so ill in such a beautiful place. After this, I went back to the flat with my auntie and uncle and kind of put the rest of my trip through Eastern Europe on hold. I was laid up for about a week, just laying in the flat and focusing on getting better. It was a really shitty time, actually. Finally, I kind of felt a bit better, so I continued to Berlin, um, which has always been a dream of mine. I loved history and the history around World War II, and it was just so fascinating to me. I settled into Berlin. I got a pretty cheap hostel room. I got to see things like the Berlin Wall. If you're not familiar, the Berlin Wall was a guarded concrete barrier that physically and ideologically divided Berlin from 1961 to 1989. Construction of the wall was commenced by the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, East Germany, on 13th of August 1961. The wall cut off West Berlin from surrounding East Germany, including East Berlin. The barrier included guard towers placed along large concrete walls, accompanied by a wide area, later known as the Death Strip, that contained anti-vehicle trenches, beds of nails, and other defenses. The Eastern Bloc portrayed the wall as protecting its population from fascist elements conspiring to prevent the will of the people from building a socialist state in East Germany. Um, just fascinating place to be. I got to visit the longest section of the Berlin Wall that is still standing. Really close by was this outdoor museum called the Topography of Terror. It's an outdoor and indoor history museum. It's located on Prince Albrecht Strasse, on the site of buildings which during the Nazi regime from 1933 to 1945 was the SS Reich main security office, the headquarters of the Schützenspoisel, the SD, and the Gestapo. The buildings that housed the Gestapo and the SS headquarters were largely destroyed by Allied bombing during early 1945, and the ruins demolished after the war. The boundary between the American and Soviet zones of occupation in Berlin ran along the Prince Albrecht Strasse, so the street soon became a fortified boundary, and the Berlin Wall ran along the south side of the street. From 1961 to 1989, the wall here was never demolished. The section adjacent to the Topography of Terror site is the longest extant segment of the outer wall, as the longer East Side Gallery section in Friedrichshain was part of the inner wall, not visible from West Berlin. This was such an experience for me. This was the first time I really got to be a kind of ground zero of a genocide, and just walking through that museum was so humbling, just seeing these atrocities that were committed on such a large scale to millions of people. It I'd read a lot of books about it, but nothing really put it into perspective as much as being there and just seeing the devastation that had happened in Germany with all of this. It was really, really humbling. It was a really dark day, and it was a gray sky day in Berlin. It I can't really find the right words to describe the emotions that I felt there, but it was definitely humbling, and it definitely made you feel differently about your life. And I thought that I was having a hard time and a hard go with my cancer, and that I was kind of dealt a raw hand. And just seeing something like that, these millions of lives just cut short, disrupted, it really made me put everything into perspective. And I really realized that, it can always be worse, and it can always be worse. I got to visit the Brandenburg Gate, the Reichstag building, just these amazing government offices. It was such a cold day. I decided to treat myself to a steak dinner at the middle of the day, which, ate up a large majority of my travel budget. Going out to eat in Europe is not cheap at all. Uh, after this, I continued my travels onward to Prague. I got to stay in Old Town with the old bridge and stuff. And the first day I was there, I did a bit of sightseeing, and I found a hostel that was right in Old Town. It was a beautiful old building, but the most sketchy hostel. Um, the locks on my room had been broken several times over. You could see that people had jimmied them open. Luckily, I had nothing of value to my name, so I wasn't too concerned about things being stolen, but it just gave off a really strange vibe. On day 2 in Prague, I had been in Europe for about 3 weeks now, and I really wanted some marijuana. I wanted to smoke a joint. I was craving a joint. I wasn't feeling the best. My stomach was upset. I was still feeling a bit ill from the chemo, so I did what any reasonable person would do, and I looked online about where I could buy weed in Prague, Czech Republic. It told me which bar to go to, and that you just go to this bar and you go into the bathroom. Somebody will follow you into the bathroom, and then they'll get you sorted out. So I'm not going to say the name of the bar, but it was this awesome rockabilly bar. Great ambiance. I went in there, and I thought it would be really awkward if I just entered a bar and went straight to the bathroom. So I went to the bar, I sat at the bar, I had a couple drinks, I worked on getting up my liquid courage to a stage where I could go and make this transaction with a foreigner who doesn't understand me, and I don't understand due to the language breakdown. So after a few drinks, when I had a definite glow on, I was filled with the liquid courage and decided that I would go for it. I went into the bathroom, and sure enough, somebody followed me into the bathroom, and easy enough, I did the international symbol for marijuana and asked marijuana, and we agreed on a price. I got my weed. I left the bar to try it. It wasn't BC good, but it was pretty good weed, especially for being in the middle of nowhere and finding it on the internet that this is where to go. I went back to the hostel, and I rolled a few joints. There was a couple other travelers at the hostel, mostly Europeans, and I offered to smoke with some of them, and all of them turned me down. Apparently, in Europe, it's a big thing to smoke your marijuana with tobacco, which I find to be totally disgusting. I mean, I already had cancer once. I don't need to be smoking tobacco with my marijuana cigarettes. Uh, so I had a couple joints, and I decided to go back to the Rockabilly bar. It was a bit later in the evening by this point, and I went back to the bar, and I'm sitting at the bar, and you have a clear view of the restrooms there. So I was having a couple of pints, and I look up, and Buddy, who followed me into the bathroom, was kind of standing in the back by a back room that was right by the bathroom, and I lifted up my glass in a cheers type of motion to him, and he motioned for me to come to the back. Being a couple drinks in, I thought nothing of it, and I sauntered to the back of this bar, and he started asking me, Charlie, Charlie, and in Germany at the east and west, they have something called Checkpoint Charlie in between East Germany and West Germany, where the Americans would allow people to travel through. So I thought by him asking me Charlie, he was asking if I was a foreigner or if I was a tourist, an American. So I just smiled and said Charlie. He brought me into the back room, and there was 2 or 3 other people in the back room, and he plopped down this flap of coke onto the table, and he pointed at it, and he just said Charlie, Charlie, and I felt so fucking out of my depth. I was so uncomfortable, but I mean, he'd already pulled out this cocaine, and I mean, what do you do in that situation? Smile, nod, and back away. So he started busting up rails, and he's like, Charlie, Charlie, you try. Back when I worked on the oil field, I had done cocaine recreationally, if you can, from time to time. So I just did not see any way to get out of this situation. So everybody was doing rails, and I did one rail, and God, the cocaine was so good, but I was so uncomfortable, and all I could think is, man, you just had brain surgery. What the fuck are you doing? Like, what the fuck are you doing, man? You're in Czech Republic banging rails off a table with these fucking strangers you don't even know. After my first bump, he railed up a couple more, and he just kept saying, Charlie, Charlie, you buy now. And I did not want to be buying cocaine in a foreign country. That chapter of my life where I was a casual cocaine user, that chapter had long since closed when I was diagnosed with brain cancer. So I said, yes, I will buy some. Yes, I'll buy. I need to get my wallet. It's on my coat in the bar. And I went out to where I was seated in the bar, and I just kept walking past there. I didn't even pay my tab. I just pieced out of that bar as fast as I could, straight back to the hostel, into my room, locked the room. A bit later in the night, 2 other guys came in, and they because it's a shared room in a hostel, right? And they just sat on their bed speaking in a foreign language and they kept motioning towards me. I'm sure it was harmless, but it sounded so harsh, and I was already so paranoid about what was happening. Between the weed and the cocaine, I was just fidgety and I was not in a good place mentally. It was definitely time to leave. So as soon as they dropped off, I pieced out of that hostel and I went straight to the train station. The train station, there was no trains leaving, so I just sat there outside of the train station waiting for the first train to take me back to Denmark. Um, yeah, so I caught the first train in the morning. I went back to Denmark. And continued my trip there. I spent a couple more days with my auntie and uncle before I flew back to Seattle to transfer and go to Canada. When I got to Seattle, I was taking a bus. There's a shuttle bus between the Seattle airport and Vancouver International Airport. So I took this bus. It was late at night. There was, I don't know, a dozen, 2 dozen people on the bus. Most of them were older people, like senior old. So when we got to the border, everybody has to get out of the bus and go through customs or border control. I obviously there's all these older people and I'm younger, I'm more fit, so I let the older people go through the border security before I did. Um, so as the last person going through security, I get there and they start interrogating. They start questioning me. Why did you buy your ticket to Eastern Europe on such a whim? Why did you buy this 10 days ago and then you only went there for X amount of days? Why this? Why that? And oh, we've randomly selected you to toss your bag. So they tossed my bag, and I was getting a bit cheeky about, yeah, I've been randomly selected for sure. I'm sure it was pretty random. This, dude with a beard just randomly selected. In retrospect, I shouldn't have really talked back that much or been as cheeky, but I did, and so they told me that they needed to do a further inspection. They brought me into a back room and I got strip searched, which was a terrible, terrible thing to have happen. I do not recommend it. If you can avoid it at all costs. I knew that things were really not going my way when the door closed behind me and the border official was like, okay, take off your shirt. And oh shit, oh, here we go. So I take off my shirt and continues, take off your pants, take off your underwear. And I'm feeling super vulnerable. I'm just standing in the middle of this room, bare ass naked, with this guy just looking at me. And it got even worse to the point where he's like, okay, turn around, spread your cheeks, cough. Just so invasive. And it was a terrible end to such a great trip. Luckily, I had not brought anything illegal back with me. I mean, why would I really? But still, it was super degrading, and I definitely would not recommend getting strip searched by the American border guards. That was pretty much the end of my trip. Nothing eventful happened after that. The bus rolled into Vancouver and I proceeded to make my way home. So that was my first international travel after being diagnosed with cancer. It was a whirlwind, and I learned so much about what, I don't want to say my new normal was, but what my life was going to consist of from there on out, and how much had changed since being diagnosed with cancer. I was no longer a 23-year-old carefree male, and I realized that things have just changed. I got to live a better lifestyle, and I have to be more health conscious. I have to take more care of my body. I can't be taking these fucking crazy risks doing just stupid shit in other countries. Did that stop me from always doing stupid shit in other countries? No. But, it was definitely a wake up call. Uh, and that pretty much concludes my trip through Eastern Europe. I'm glad you guys joined me for this episode. Next week, we're going to hop into a bit of a heavier discussion. We're going to talk about getting diagnosed and the original diagnoses and what that is like. I would love it if you guys would, especially people who've dealt with cancer or family members of people who have dealt with cancer, if you email me and maybe tell me about your original diagnosis, Facebook message me. My email is jdpodcast21@gmail.com. And yeah, I hope you join me there or on fthisnetwork.podbean. It's a group of local artists. There's a ton of awesome podcasts there, everything from parenting podcasts all the way down to tattooing podcasts. We have Divine Ink there. A rotation of tattoo artists are always on there. So definitely go and check out some of the fellow artists there. Subscribe, check out my YouTube. A like and a subscribe would be so awesome. But until next week, I hope you all stay safe and thank you for joining me.